All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be starting our talk on World War One. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the first major world conflict that has been seen since the French and Indian War, part of the 7 Years' War, all that stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead. There are four main causes of World War One, and we're going to take a look at all four of those today. Now, and you can sum it up with the acronym MAIN, meaning militarism, the alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with this. Militarism, basically, everything is for and about the military. It's a thing of pride for a lot of these countries in Europe and around the world for that matter. Basically, if you have a strong military, you are a great and powerful country because you can supply your troops with, the best equipment, the best weapons, the best leaders, all that stuff. So there would start to be large armies just in these countries, and they would be ready to move out quickly should they be needed. And this was something that was highly valued. If you have a large mobile force, that was really awesome, and that was something that you wanted if you were one of these countries. Now, the alliances. Well, what is an alliance? It is basically a deal between countries that, hey, if I'm under attack, are you going to help me? You will? Awesome. Okay. So these would be formed of keeping peace in Europe. And the ironic thing, as you see at the bottom there, it actually pushed Europe into World War One. So because nobody knew who was allied with who. So that causes some problems, as we will see today. All right, World War One, we have two primary alliances, the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. We then have the Triple Entente, which is France, Russia, and Great Britain. And much later in the war, like the final year of the war, the United States. And the Triple Alliance actually ends up getting an additional ally after Italy actually switches sides, and that is the Ottoman Empire. All right, so this is where we are with the alliances before the war. There we go. Imperialism. All right. Basically, when powerful countries dominate weaker countries. So this is basically the end of the race for conquering and colonizing and taking over areas of Africa. It was like the last great frontier of colonization and empire building for Europeans. So there's all this competition for all that land, the resources, all of these things. And World War One just brings it all to a head, and that's when the guns start blazing. All right. Disputes over land, who actually controls what rivers, what sides of rivers, whose railways are whose, all this stuff. And yeah, just the rivalries for whatever land that's still available, gets taken over by who. That is a big part of this as well. And also military tensions raising because you need to protect your holdings in these other places. So there are soldiers moving about all over the place. So that just adds even more tension. Okay. This map here is showing what imperialism was like in 1900. As you can see, like France, they basically had all of the Sahara Desert, that big, huge chunk of northwestern Africa. And the British, they had a huge area of eastern North Africa, like from Egypt on down to like Ethiopia. Well, around Ethiopia. Ethiopia actually was independent. Germany, it had some stuff going around, some little holdings in Africa as well as in the Pacific. Japan, they actually had Korea. The US, we had some stuff here and there, not a huge amount, mostly some Pacific islands. Italy, they had a little bit of stuff around Ethiopia and East Africa, not too much anywhere else. They were on the weak side, actually. All right, so there's just an idea of what we're working with. Now, nationalism, the last part of those four main causes. Nationalism is that deep, extreme devotion to your country, where it's like, we are better than everyone else just because this is where we're from. So, say Italy, for instance. Italy's the best country in the world because, Italians are the best people, things like that. That type of animosity towards other ethnicities or just nationalities in general. So, like, if you think that you're better than somebody else just because of where you're from. So there's going to be a lot of competition, and it's going to raise tensions even higher than they already are. All right, so competitions for markets and materials, that's getting into the imperialism stuff again, also just trade in general as well. Which country can make the best stuff, who can sell their stuff faster, all of that. And something that's really going to be a thorn in the side of two countries is with France and Germany. So you should remember that the Franco-Prussian War was something that happened in the later 1800s, and Germany stomped France in that war, and they took over this territory that's between the two called Alsace-Lorraine. France wants it back, and it's now in Germany's hands. So this is a big issue that has to be addressed between these two countries. And that's going to be a very big fighting point for them. Right? Alsace-Lorraine is that pink area in the upper right corner. Traditionally, it is a part of France. At least, it is now. But throughout history, it has belonged to, depending on the decade or the century, it's belonged to either France or Germany. Just depends on who just happened to be going through that area with an army at the time, really. All right. So, nationalism is what is going to lead to the event that starts it all. In the Balkans, Southeastern Europe, this is, the place where, like, Serbia, Albania, Croatia, all those countries right above Greece. They are a powder keg. And what is a powder keg? It's basically a wooden barrel filled with gunpowder. You don't want to set fire next to one of those, right? That is what's going to happen, though. Okay? So, Austria-Hungary and Serbia both want control of Bosnia. It's on the border between the two, and Austria-Hungary takes it. Bosnia is not very happy about it. They're going to start stirring up some trouble with the Serbians. And this is because of something called Pan-Slavism. Basically, that all the Slavic people share a common ancestry and nationality, and they should be with each other, just the Slavic people. Russia is like the mother of all Slavic countries. It's the biggest and strongest of the Slavic nations. So they're like the mother to all these small Slavic country children, quote unquote. So they're like the protector. Now, the spark that starts it all, June 28th, 1924, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie are assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia, by the 19-year-old extremist Gavrilo Princip, who was a member of a Serbian terrorist group known as the Black Hand. Quite menacing, right? Now, the thing about that is he just happened upon them. So this day, June 28th, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife, they are in Sarajevo, basically on a goodwill tour with the Serbians, and with the Bosnians, I should say. So they are just going about doing their business, doing all the political functions and everything, and the Black Hand is preparing to assassinate them, especially him, Franz Ferdinand. And what they're planning on doing is blowing him up. So what they're going to do is, as he and his motorcade are going by, they plan to just throw bombs into the street as he's passing, and they explode once his car is going over top of it. But what happens is there's a delay in the timer for the explosion, and it actually blows up the car that is behind Ferdinand's car. And the two bodyguards that were inside that car got injured, taken to the hospital. And after some time went by, he and his wife were actually on their way to the hospital so they could check on their guys, make sure they're getting taken care of, all that type of stuff. Franz Ferdinand and his wife were actually really good people. So their driver accidentally made a wrong turn. He turned like a block too soon for the hospital, and he pulled over to the side of the street real quick, just be like, hey, I made a wrong turn. Where was that turn I'm supposed to make? And Gavrilo, he just happens to be walking along the road there, sees them pulled over on the side of the road in their car, which is a convertible, by the way. So what he does is he walks up to the car, pulls out a pistol, and lights them up, kills them both. And then, of course, he gets jumped and beaten up and everything. He later gets executed for assassinating the heir to an empire and his wife. Right? So that's what does it. So, then how does everybody else get involved? So, Franz Joseph, who is the leader of Austria-Hungary, so, like the father of Franz Ferdinand, he basically goes to his buddy, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and he's like, hey, if things go down, you got my back? And Wilhelm is basically like, he gives them what is called the blank check. So basically, we will support you no matter what. You got us for as long as you need us. So Austria-Hungary wants to destroy Serbia, and the assassination of the heir, Franz Ferdinand, is the perfect excuse to light them up, to destroy them and take them over, make Serbia no longer a thing. Now, it gets even more complicated, and there is a perfect little thing that I'm going to read to you guys real quick called If World War I Were a Bar Fight. So just bear with me as I read this. So, Germany, Austria, and Italy are standing together in the middle of a pub when Serbia bumps into Austria and spills Austria's pint. Austria demands Serbia buy it a complete new suit because there are splashes on its trouser leg. Germany expresses its support for Austria's point of view. Britain recommends that everyone calm down a bit. So then, Serbia points out that it can't afford a whole suit but offers to pay for the cleaning of Austria's trousers. Russia and Serbia look at Austria. Austria asks Serbia who it's looking at. Russia suggests that Austria should leave its little brother alone. Austria inquires as to whose army will assist Russia in compelling it to do so. Germany appeals to Britain that France has been looking at it, and that this is sufficiently out of order that Britain should not intervene. Britain replies that France can look at who it wants to, and that Britain is looking at Germany too. And what is Germany going to do about it? See how things can kind of flare up? All right, so then Germany tells Russia to stop looking at Austria, or Germany will render Russia incapable of such action. Britain and France ask Germany whether it's looking at Belgium. Turkey and Germany go off into a corner and whisper. When they come back, Turkey makes a show of not looking at anyone. Germany rolls up its sleeves, looks at France, and punches Belgium. France and Britain punch Germany. Austria punches Russia. Germany punches Britain and France with one hand and Russia with the other. Russia throws a punch at Germany but misses and nearly falls over. Japan calls over from the other side of the room that it's on Britain's side but stays there. Italy surprises everyone by punching Austria. Australia punches Turkey and gets punched back. There are no hard feelings, though, because Britain made Australia do it. France gets thrown through a plate glass window, then gets back up and carries on fighting. Russia then gets thrown through another one, gets knocked out, suffers brain damage, and wakes up with a complete personality change. Italy throws a punch at Austria and misses, but Austria falls over anyway. Italy raises both fists in the air and runs around the room chanting. America waits till Germany is about to fall over from sustained punching from Britain and France, then walks over and smashes it with a bar stool, then pretends it won the whole fight all by itself. By now, all the chairs are broken and the big mirror over the bar is shattered. Britain and France and America agree that Germany threw the first punch, so the whole thing is Germany's fault. While Germany is still unconscious, they go through its pockets, steal its wallet, and buy drinks for all their friends. All right. Now, I know that was a lot, but if you look at that all written out, it actually is a perfect storytelling of how World War I plays out. All right, now, so getting into how everything is really getting started, just to help fill in the blanks of the bar fight story. We have an ultimatum that Austria-Hungary gives Serbia, and it's a very harsh one, and they only have 2 days to reply. Now, there are 12 demands, and Serbia meets 11 out of the 12, and Austria-Hungary is not willing to negotiate at all. It's like, hey, you didn't do all 12 things? You're in for it now. We declare war. So, 5 days later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. This then is going to initiate Russia mobilizing its ready, so getting its army ready. Germany, in response to Russia getting ready to fight, declares war on Russia. Then Germany declares war on France and invades Belgium, like 2 days later. And then Britain declares war on Germany in response to the invasion of Belgium. It's a lot, I understand, but this is the quickest, best breakdown I can give. Now, so we have our two sides emerging. We have the Allies, which of course is Great Britain, France, Russia, Serbia, Belgium, Japan, and Italy, because Italy actually switches sides. And then we have the Central Powers, which is Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, kind of because they're in the center of the Allies. Like they're just a column with opposing Allied power columns on either side of them. All right. And this little graph right here shows when basically the alliances began and when treaties were going on between who, so kind of tying everybody together, how they get tied together. All right, and to make it a little easier, here's the map showing where everybody is. The Allied powers are in green, Central Powers are that orangey goldish color, and purple, people that just don't care. Here's a quick little list of the main ideas and of things that happened during World War I, and then we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty. All right, so by the end of the war, a good 8.5 million soldiers were dead. Even more millions were wounded. Hundreds of billions of dollars was the cost economically, plus just all the destruction of pretty much everything everywhere where the fighting took place. All right, so you could also label the period, the people of this period, like the lost generation, because so many young men died in the course of this war. It would take a number of years for populations in Europe to recover from the loss of life due to World War I, also known as the Great War, the war to end all wars. All right, so one big thing that we need to talk about is the fact of geography. Germany is right smack in the middle of where the Allies are. You have Britain and France on the west, and you have Russia on the east. They are stuck between the two areas of Allied forces, so they have to fight a two-front war. They're fighting on two sides. And before World War I had started, Germany had already been getting a plan in place on the off chance that war did break out and they had to fight enemies on both sides of the country. And this was developed by a general by the name of Schlieffen. So it's called the Schlieffen Plan. It is a strategy to fight a two-front war. All right, so the basics of it are they cut through Belgium into France. They could destroy France quickly with the vast majority of their forces, and then they turn their attention to Russia. And this is because Russia, while it is a very large country with the biggest European population at the time, it takes them forever to get their army ready. They're a little less, their armament is a little less. They're more spread out. Their stuff doesn't work as well. You know, they're just technologically not quite up to par with everybody else. So take out France, who was one of the top dogs in Europe at this time. Then you go after the big, slow monster that is Russia. All right. So here is basically the plan. We have Germany in the purple on the right. You cut through Belgium using it as a shortcut because along that France-German border is actually more heavily defended areas. So the German plan is to bypass, go around those French defenses and basically hit them from behind and taking them off guard and beating them a lot faster, including taking Paris, the capital of France. All right, so how do you make this work? Speed. But it did not work because the French and the British had much stronger militaries than Germany anticipated, and Russia moved a lot faster than anticipated. If this war had been fought about 30 years earlier, Germany would have been able to carry this plan out successfully, really, because they, 30 years earlier, they were the top military. Now Britain and France are on equal level with German military capabilities, and Russia, while they are still behind, they're doing a lot better than they were. So one battle that really needs to be talked about is the First Battle of the Marne, which is a river that is in France and Belgium. Really, it is, well, it's in France. All right, so the Germans, they get within 15 miles of Paris. That is huge because no one expected them to get that far. At least the Allies didn't. So the British and French, they launch a counterattack, and to get soldiers to the front lines, they're even using the taxis of Paris to move soldiers to the front. And this is the battle that stopped the Schlieffen Plan from being able to be finished. It halted it dead in its tracks. And so, yeah, there you go. There's the map. The Marne River right there coming from Paris and moving east, like that top, the middle river line right through here. So that just bounces the Germans back. All right. Now, this is going to then create what we call the Western Front. So this is where a stalemate occurs. No one's moving. They start digging in and digging these trench battle lines that eventually, as you can see, are going to cover 500 miles from the North Sea. So basically the area of water east of Great Britain and all the way down to the Swiss Alps in the south. That is a huge battle line. You never saw battle lines like this before in warfare. This is the length of entire countries, not just, a few square miles like it would have been in the past. Now, trench warfare was pretty much as brutal as it got, right? So there's bug and rat infestations that are, they're chewing on the men in the middle of the night while they're sleeping. Their food is not in the best condition either. Fresh food was not a thing. And sleep, you're not getting very much sleep because there's constant shooting and explosions going off. And between the two different trench lines, the Allies and the Central Powers, is no man's land. And it's called that because it was expected no one could survive out there if they got caught out there by themselves. All right, it's just a crater-filled stretch of mud and blood and nastiness that you just don't want to get caught in. All right, now some trenches would be very elaborately built. Those were typically the German trenches. They built them to last. They had much better quality trenches. They had, in some cases, drainage systems put in place so that the soldiers weren't walking in mud all day, every day. They had bunkers that men could go down into and sleep in, and it was just a better situation than the Allies had. They kind of just threw theirs together. All right, so yeah. And with all these trenches all over the place, like you see, then there's these trenches that move from one line to another so that, there's a way to fall back in case, the enemy reaches the first one here, like after they cross no man's land. You can then retreat down this corridor to a new defensible line and then hopefully push back and retake your first trench and then maybe chase them back across no man's land to their own trenches. And not to mention, you're crossing over barbed wire, and there's going to be landmines and all sorts of stuff like that in the way as well. All right, so here is an aerial shot of the trenches. Now, the trenches on the right are the German ones, and the ones on the left are the British. I think you can tell just from that who put a lot more work and time into designing their trench work. And yes, that would be the Germans. Germany is known for their organization and engineering skills. They put all of that to use during World War I with building these elaborate defensive systems. All right. Now, occasionally, they would try to tunnel from one trench to another. Typically, that did not work because they would end up collapsing on themselves, or the traps of trying to blow up the other trench wouldn't work very well. Explosives wouldn't go off. Sometimes the tunnels, like a German tunnel, would mine into a British tunnel, and then there's fighting going on under the ground as well as above ground. It was just a huge mess. So there wasn't a lot of tunneling going on like this, but it did happen from time to time. Right? Of course, there's going to be a lot of World War I pictures going on here. We got, guys just hanging out in the trenches trying to get some sleep while another guy's keeping guard. Right? There's another one, guys just hanging out, just trying to not get killed. And this one, if you can tell, the guys in the background, they have gas masks on. This is the result of a chemical explosion attack going on. This guy in the front who's like grasping at his throat, he is dying from poisonous gases. All right, weapons of World War I. The machine gun became a iconic and well-used piece of killing hardware. One team of like 3 guys with a machine gun could lay waste and keep 100 men pinned down easily. So the machine gun got extensive use as a defensive weapon during these attacks of mass waves of men moving forward. Men were dropping by the hundreds in these attacks within, minutes, 3-4 minutes. You might have, 600 dead bodies just laying in the mud. Poison gases, the Germans got into it first. The results would typically blindness. Sometimes it would be permanent. Other times it would just be temporary. You never knew. It just depended how the chemicals reacted to your body. Men would choke to death on these fumes. It would cause chemical burns on their bodies, which would be excruciatingly painful. And a lot of these things would potentially cause death as well. You never fully knew what the effect was going to be of the gases. All right. Some of them were chlorine gases, and there was mustard gas. Yeah, stuff like that was just brutal, brutal, brutal stuff. And one interesting piece to note there, Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany in World War II, he was a soldier for Germany during World War I. He actually, I believe it was not once but twice, suffered from and survived gas attacks, which the chemicals, he was even temporarily blinded in his final attack that he survived. And the World War I actually ended while he was recovering in the hospital. All right, moving on. Here's an example of the machine guns. That is a Vickers machine gun on the left, and there is an early attempt at a gas mask for a British soldier. You can tell by the style rifle that he's using. That is a Enfield battle rifle, which was a British rifle. All right, the tank was first introduced in World War I. They were basically tractors with metal, like steel plates around them with guns put inside these metal boxes. That's a very blunt and quick way to describe them. Airplanes had been in use, but World War I is where they first started to use planes for fighting purposes. It would originally start out as planes being used just for doing photography of enemy battle lines and troop movements, things like that, until eventually the pilots of these planes from opposing sides would start shooting at each other with pistols and shotguns, even just bolt-action rifles. You would also have them dropping stuff like grenades and sticks of dynamite down into the trenches, and this would eventually evolve into having mounted machine guns on the planes and bombs that they could then drop onto the men below. So that is the origin of the fighter plane and bomber planes. All right, we also get what are called Zeppelins. These are basically, think of a blimp, but used for warfare. They have guns and bombs and stuff like that on them. And in some cases, they would have planes attached to them that they would then deploy into battle from these. That wasn't very often, but it did happen on rare occasion. All right, here's an early example of a British, I believe it's a Mark IV tank. All right, there's a style plane. That type, I believe, is a fighter plane. And that is what a Zeppelin looks like. All right. Also, we're going to get submarines being used for warfare on a massive scale. The first successful one was actually during the American Civil War. The Confederates had a submarine. But in World War I, we get mass use, and the Germans had what they called the Unterseeboot, or the U-boat for short. And they would see even more extensive use in World War II. All right, here's an example of what a U-boat looked like. Now, you would think that with this technology, the war would move fast, but the thing is, they had improved weaponry, but they did not improve the tactics used to fight the war. So nothing is going to change unless you change the way you fight, okay? Which is why World War II was a little better when it came to how the war was fought. Because if you have these trench battle lines and you're still fighting as if men are lining up in rank like in the Civil War or the Revolutionary War and just shooting at like lines of men shooting at lines of men, you don't do that if you have these fast-firing machine guns and these massive artillery cannons and these repeating rifles where you can fire off 5 shots in 30 seconds. You just don't do that with this type of weaponry. It just creates massive amounts of casualties, which is why you might have 1 million casualties in one battle over the course of like 3 weeks. That is a massive amount of loss. Now, in 1917, the U.S. is going to join the war on the side of the Allies. And this is due to the Germans not caring about who they are hurting with their U-boats, their submarine warfare. because 2 years earlier, they torpedoed the Lusitania, which was basically a civilian ship, but it was also transporting military goods to the British. It was sunk with a torpedo, and it actually killed well over 100 Americans. The American public is up in arms over this. Just like, how could they do this? And, it's like they put a restriction on using their submarines. But then, as time went by, they started doing a little worse and the worse. Like, you know what? We need to get using our boats again, and I don't care what the repercussions are. We're also going to have cultural ties that'll pull us in because, this is basically like democracies versus monarchies. We also have more common history and language with like the British. We all speak English. Our country used to be a colony of the British. So there's a lot of shared history there. And, we were allies with Russia, and that's just going to create a whole other set of problems. A democratic government did step in after Tsar Nicholas II stepped down in Russia, but that didn't last very long at all because there was a communist or Bolshevik revolution that took Russia out of the war, and now Germany could use all their forces against the allies in the West, meaning France and Great Britain and now the US. And the final thing that fully pulled us in is the Zimmerman telegram. Basically, the Germans were like, hey, Mexico, start a war with America so they stay out of Europe, and we will assist you in retaking the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of California, so that you get back territory that they stole from you. And Mexico and also Britain intercepted the message too, and they turned it all over to the U.S. And it's just like, this is what they're trying to pull. Is like, and America's just like, oh, I don't think so. So now we're going to go put our boots on the necks of Germany for this. Now we declare war on Germany, April 1917. They launch a huge offensive after Russia comes out. And before we get there, but then we get, over 1 million troops there. We launch a counterattack, and we just start pushing them back and back and back until we finally win. The Kaiser Wilhelm II, he steps down. Germany now enters an armistice, and we basically going to start getting the peace talks. An armistice is basically a ceasefire. We're going to stop fighting for now, and we're going to see what we can do to end it all and hopefully have peace. All right, that's where we're going to end. And when we come back next time, we'll be talking about the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles.